The manager's voice carried further than it needed to. "Keep yourself in the back tonight. The VIP table doesn't want to look at a body like yours while they eat." A ripple of laughter rose from a nearby table. Avalon Reed, 27, 5'5", folded the damp cloth in her hand and said nothing. She had learned long ago that dignity was something you kept quiet, not something you announced. What the manager meant, and never said out loud, was that she wasn't to speak to that table, wasn't to take an order, wasn't to be seen standing beside it. He hadn't accounted for the kitchen. As he turned away, he glanced at his phone and gave the faintest nod toward a shadowed corner table, a signal to someone he was being paid to please. A manager who takes money to keep a waitress off a certain table is a manager working somebody else's plan. She filed it away and kept pouring water. At 8:52, the heavy oak doors opened, and the room's temperature seemed to drop 3 degrees. Rhys Moretti walked in first, the Mafia boss who ran Moretti Logistics, and through it, most of what moved through the port of Miami. 33, built like a man who never needed to raise his voice to be obeyed, a small compass tattoo curling above his collar. Table 7 had been booked that afternoon under a shell company name, standard procedure for men who preferred not to be expected. Beside him walked Celeste Langford, platinum hair, a silver dress slit to the hip, eyes drifting toward the bar like a woman checking a clock she didn't want anyone to notice. Avalon caught her perfume from 10 feet away, rare specific, the same scent Arrival's crew had left behind the month before. Coincidences didn't usually smell that exact. 2 men at table 4 ordered only water, their left hands drifting again and again to their ears. A lean man in a charcoal trench coat had been sitting alone at the bar for 19 minutes and had not ordered a single thing. Celeste's fingers tapped her thin silver bracelet twice, too deliberate to be nerves. Across the room, the man at the bar lifted his glass a half-inch in answer. She grabbed an order slip and wrote in hard block letters, "Your girlfriend betrayed you. They're in position. Bar and table 4. She folded it into a square small enough to hide in a damp palm. If this paper didn't reach him before the next course, an empire was going to end before dessert. The head waiter assigned to table 7 had just been pulled aside to mop up a spilled Magnum at the next booth, over nothing more sinister than the kind of accident that happens 6 times a night in a restaurant this size. The expediter needed someone fast to run the dessert course before it melted, and Avalon happened to be standing closest to the pass. The manager's order had never accounted for the kitchen making its own decisions. She lifted the panna cotta onto a silver tray. Each step across the floor sounded quiet to the room and deafening inside her own chest. Her fuller frame blocked the sightline from the bar for exactly 2 seconds, long enough. She set the plate down and slid the folded paper beneath his scotch glass in the same motion. Rhys didn't look up right away. When he did, their eyes held for less than a heartbeat, and something passed between them that needed no words. She turned and walked away, unhurried, as if nothing had happened. In that same lean, she'd caught something inside Celeste's open clutch. Not just a flash drive marked Harbor Access, but a second one, smaller, fitted with a blinking chip, a live tracker. Someone didn't just want this Mafia boss dead. Someone knew exactly where he'd be, minute by minute, for weeks. 1, 2, 3. His thumb swept the note into his palm beneath the tablecloth. The muscle in his jaw tightened just enough to show. Celeste rose. "I'm going to fix my makeup." She tilted her head toward the bar before disappearing down the hall. The man at the bar was Celeste's half-brother, the same man Rhys had financially ruined 2 years earlier. This wasn't a contract. This was a family debt wearing a business suit. The 2 men at table 4 slid their hands inside their jackets. The man at the bar stood, dropped a $100 bill on the counter, and didn't wait for change. The woman the room had told to disappear now held the only map of who was about to die. Rhys had read the note. He knew. But what does a man like that do when the woman he loves has just walked toward the restroom and 3 guns are already rising behind her? The band kept playing. Nobody in that dining room understood yet that the next 90 seconds would end careers, marriages, and one very old grudge. Rhys stood the instant Celeste sat back down, taking her hand as if to steal her away for a private word. In truth, he twisted her wrist behind her, using her slight frame as a shield against the first shot from the bar. The gunshot came fast and muffled. A bottle of wine exploded across the table into 100 pieces of glass. The 2 men from table 4 surged forward. Rhys kicked his chair into their path, drawing a pistol from an ankle holster, firing twice, 1 round into a thigh, 1 into a shoulder. Both men went down hard. No theatrics, just gravity doing its job. A 3rd man came through the kitchen doorway with a small black remote already gripped in one hand. The device had been wired into the underside of table 7 that afternoon, while a busboy no one thought twice about worked alone in the private dining room for 20 unsupervised minutes before Rhys's own security ever swept it. He hesitated half a second, recognizing the compass tattoo on Rhys's neck. He'd once worked for the same family, but his thumb was already resting on the trigger. Avalon didn't think. She grabbed the heavy silver tray, nearly 9 pounds of steel, and swung it into the side of his head. His arm jerked wide as the shot buried itself in the ceiling, and his thumb, already pressing down, slammed the trigger 3 seconds late instead of on time. The corner of the restaurant near the windows lit up and blew outward. Glass rained down. 3 guests were shaken and lightly cut, and the fire alarm screamed through the chaos. For the first time in longer than anyone could remember, this Mafia boss had lost control inside his own room. He used the confusion to close on Celeste's half-brother, snapping his wrist and taking the Glock before the man could raise it again. He didn't kill him. He wanted him breathing and talking later. The entire sequence had taken under 15 seconds. Celeste sobbed on the floor, her dress soaked with wine and littered with glass. Rhys looked down at her, his voice cold as still water. "You should have let your brother pay his own debts." His eyes swept the wreckage and found Avalon catching her breath behind the oak service stand. He touched 2 fingers to his temple, a silent thank you offered in the middle of the ruin. The woman the room had told to stay out of sight had just thrown the tray that saved him. The flawless woman on his arm had been the one who set it in motion. Miami wouldn't stop talking about the reversal for months. Sirens rose in the distance. Rhys looked at Avalon once more before his men swept in around him. She had just saved the life of a man half the city feared, and made herself a target in the same breath. Rhys turned the woman he called his girlfriend into a human shield in under a second flat. So pick a side before the next part starts. Was that a cornered man doing whatever it takes to survive? Or proof he was always capable of exactly what got his own sister killed 11 years ago? One sentence: cold survivor, or someone worse than the people hunting him. Drop your verdict below. Gideon Thorne's crew moved through the wreckage before the first cruiser even reached the curb. Men in dark suits wiped surfaces, gathered weapons, and walked a sobbing Celeste out through the service alley before a single officer stepped inside. When police finally reached the dining room, they found 2 wounded gunmen, a shattered corner of glass and stone, and a story already assembled by Rhys's attorneys. Self-defense, unnamed rivals, nothing that would survive a courtroom, but everything that would end the questions by morning. Avalon gave the detective exactly what he expected from her. "I heard pops, I dropped my tray and hid." He barely wrote it down. An overweight waitress in shock wasn't worth his time. He waved her off without a second look. For 3 days she barely slept, locked inside her apartment in Edgewater, flinching at every sound in the hallway. On the 4th night, the rain came down in sheets. A black Escalade eased to the curb. Gideon stepped out beneath an umbrella, his voice even. "Mr. Moretti would like a word, not for questioning." She climbed in. The car smelled of leather and quiet cologne. They drove toward Coral Gables, past an iron gate that closed heavily behind them, toward an estate that looked out over a private canal. Rhys stood in front of the fireplace, dressed only in a black turtleneck, the compass tattoo in the wave down his forearm lit orange by the flames. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed her one. "Drink," he said. "You're not in danger here." She took a sip. It burned on the way down. He crossed to a safe beneath his desk and drew out a thin, yellowed file, surveillance on her, dated 8 months earlier. "The man from the bar talked," he said. "8 months ago, someone tried the same thing, quieter. It didn't work because someone on shift that night overheard the wrong conversation and never went to the police, never sold it, just walked away and said nothing. I had every employee who worked that shift looked into. I found you." He slid the photographs across Avalon in uniform, her schedule, even a note about how she wore her hair. "Why did you save me this time?" he asked, watching her closely. "Because you said thank you," she said quietly. "And because you tipped the dishwasher who burned his hand last year." He told her something he had never told another living soul. His sister had died in a frozen shipping container 11 years earlier. Her lover at the time had been Celeste Langford, under a different name, who had sold his sister out to erase a gambling debt owed to Roman Blackwood, the same man who now ran the operation behind tonight's hit. This wasn't a new war. It was the same one, 11 years old, finally circling back. A man like Rhys didn't build a file on a waitress out of gratitude. He built it out of a Mafia boss's oldest habit. Never trust a debt you can't trace to its source. What he hadn't expected was to find, underneath 8 months of surveillance, a woman who'd had every reason to sell him out, and simply hadn't. That contradiction was more dangerous to him than any gun in the room, because it meant the wall he'd built after his sister's death had a crack in it, and he already knew exactly who was standing in the gap. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. He slid a check for $300,000 and a contract across the desk. "I don't need you to carry a gun," he said. "I need you in every meeting, every dinner, every fake wedding. Watch, listen, tell me who's about to turn on me. $500,000 a year. Do you want it?" She looked at the check at the file, at a man an entire city feared waiting on the answer of a waitress. She signed her name. The door to the underworld closed quietly behind her. Rhys's men held Celeste's half-brother in a warehouse outside the city for questioning, a decision that would matter more than anyone in that room understood yet. 6 months passed, each one busier than the last. Avalon didn't lose weight, and she stopped shrinking herself to make anyone comfortable. Rhys hired a tailor to build clothes that honored her figure instead of hiding it, and she sat in the corner of every boardroom, cataloging the smallest lying face in the room. Cataloging tells the way she once cataloged which regulars tipped and which ones only pretended to reach for their wallets. It was in month 2 that she met Marisol properly, a shipping clerk with sharp, careful eyes who'd transferred in from another crew and kept glancing at Avalon across conference tables like she was trying to place a face from somewhere. It took Avalon 3 meetings to realize why. Marisol had worked that first restaurant briefly, 8 months before Avalon ever started there. The same shift, the same night, the one Rhys's file could never quite complete. She'd overheard a conversation about a hit that never happened, said nothing, and quietly put in for a transfer the next week, telling no one, not even herself, why she'd been so afraid. Avalon never told Rhys. Some debts, she'd learned, were owed to silence, not to disclosure. and Marisol, unknowing, had earned a version of the same quiet trust Avalon had. In month 1, she caught the head accountant funneling money to Roman Blackwood's people, a discrepancy of $11 in a routine transfer, small enough that 3 auditors had already signed off on it, wrong enough that it kept her awake until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing shipping dates. By month 3, she'd shut down a federal wiretap before it went live, spotting a maintenance van that had parked in the same spot on the block for 4 consecutive days, engine running, nobody ever getting out. Working for a mafia boss, she'd learned, meant her only weapon was ever the truth nobody else in the room wanted to see. Then, combing through backup servers for evidence, she found an audio file buried in a folder marked Archive. The waveform sat there innocuous on the screen, a flat gray line waiting to become a voice. Celeste's voice, crisp and certain, speaking to her half-brother. "He'll be dead by dessert. The drive's already in my clutch." The recording had been made 17 days before the shooting. Proof this had been planned in careful detail, not decided in a moment. Avalon sat with her hand over her mouth for a full minute after it ended. The office silent, except for the hum of the server rack, before she picked up the phone to call Gideon.
Blackwood didn't stop there. His people kidnapped Avalon's younger brother straight out of Jackson Memorial, where he was being treated for a serious illness. The demand was simple. Rhys would surrender himself within 48 hours, or her brother wouldn't come home.
She learned it through an anonymous message and a photograph of him blindfolded, the phone screen too bright, in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning. Her thumb frozen over the image for what felt like an hour, and was actually 4 seconds. Her hands shook. Her eyes didn't. She'd trained herself too long to watch for the tell in someone else's face to let her own give anything away now, even alone, even terrified. Rhys didn't tell her his plan. He quietly prepared to trade himself, ready to give up everything without a word. A wire transfer moved before dawn. A car requested for an address he didn't log anywhere. She only found out when she saw an unsent message still glowing on his phone screen, left face up on the kitchen counter, like he'd forgotten for once in his life to be careful. "If I don't come back, protect Avalon, no matter what. She's the only one left." She read it twice. The second time, something in her chest went cold, and then very, very still. Rhys had spent his whole life proving he needed no one, and the one time someone finally mattered enough to break that rule, his instinct wasn't to include her. It was to disappear quietly and absorb the cost alone, the same way he'd absorbed his sister's death for 11 years, without letting anyone close enough to share it. Avalon understood that instinct better than he did. She'd spent her own life being the one who watched from the corner while everyone else made the decisions. The difference was, she'd stopped believing that watching was the same thing as accepting. What she read in that unsent message wasn't just love. It was the same file cabinet instinct he'd used on her 8 months of surveillance, now turned inward. Protect the asset, absorb the loss, never let the cost show. She didn't confront him. She built a plan of her own instead. Because a mafia boss protecting her by disappearing was still a man leaving her in the corner. And she was done staying there. That night, on the penthouse terrace over Biscayne Bay, the city lights scattered gold across the water below, wind pulling loose strands of her hair free as they sat facing each other in the dark. "You're going to turn yourself in," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The distant sound of a boat horn drifting up from the marina, the terrace door rattling faintly in its frame. He reached out, touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of it, slow enough that she felt it in her chest before she understood what it meant. "You've spent your whole life reading other people," he said. "Have you ever once read the way I look at you?" She started to shrink, the way old habit told her to, chin dropping half an inch before she caught herself. He tilted his head, his voice low, almost rough. Don't insult the woman I love. He kissed her slow, deep, a claim and a promise at once, the kind of kiss that didn't ask permission because it had already been earned. 6 months over. The exchange was set for the following morning. She had a plan of her own. He didn't know it yet.
The night before rain hadn't started yet. Miami still smelled like heat and salt water, and Avalon stood on Gideon's side of a folding table in the back office of a shuttered dry cleaners, looking at 4 faces she'd spent 6 months learning to trust, without ever once saying so out loud. There was Marisol, who ran numbers for Rhys's shipping manifests and had once slipped Avalon a warning about a rigged inspection 2 days before it happened. There was Ezra, a valet who noticed license plates the way Avalon noticed faces. There was Gideon himself, arms crossed, saying nothing the way a man says everything by staying quiet. And there was Miguel, the dishwasher from that first restaurant, the one who'd burned his hand on a fryer basket the year before Rhys ever walked through those oak doors. The one Avalon had wrapped in a clean towel and walked to urgent care on her own dime because nobody else would. He'd found her 3 months into her new life, not the other way around, and asked plainly if there was anything he could do. She hadn't forgotten the burn. He hadn't forgotten the towel. "Tomorrow," she told them, "nobody touches a gun. Nobody raises a voice. We're not taking anything back with force. We're taking it back with a room full of witnesses." Gideon studied her for a long moment, the same look he'd given her the first night he'd driven her to the estate in the rain. The look of a man recalculating what a person is worth. "You know you're doing this?" "No." "He's going to want to protect you instead." "I know," Avalon said. "That's why I'm not asking him." Outside, thunder rolled low over the bay, and nobody in that room needed her to explain twice. The next morning, the car ride to Biscayne Bay was quiet, in the particular way that means everything is being said without words. Rhys sat with his jaw tight, one hand resting on the door, the compass tattoo just visible above his collar, where his shirt had come open a button too far. He hadn't slept. Avalon could tell by the shallow line between his brows, the way his thumb kept finding the edge of his phone and stopping short of unlocking it, like he was rehearsing a goodbye he hadn't let himself say out loud yet. "You don't have to come," he said, eyes on the road. "Whatever happens at that exchange, I don't want you anywhere near it." "I'm not going to the exchange," she said. "I told you, I want to say goodbye somewhere that matters." He glanced at her, then really looked the way he had that first night across the dining room, like he was trying to read a page he already suspected he'd written wrong. "You're a terrible liar, to everyone but me," he said quietly. "I still can't tell what you're lying about." "Good," she said, and looked out the window so he wouldn't see her face. Rain streaked sideways across the glass, and somewhere behind her ribs, her pulse was doing something closer to a countdown than a heartbeat. The restaurant on Biscayne Bay had been repaired down to the brass fixtures. Glass replaced the scorch marks near the windows, sanded and repainted so thoroughly that a stranger would never have known a bomb had gone off there 6 months earlier. A charity gala filled the room, end to end. String quartet in the corner, waitstaff circling with trays of champagne, the same oak doors from that first night now propped open to let in the bay breeze. Avalon walked in on Rhys's arm in a sapphire off-the-shoulder gown that moved like water when she stepped diamonds cool against her throat. Her hair swept high off her neck for the first time in longer than she could remember. She felt every eye in the room shift toward her, and for once in her life, didn't shrink from it. The tailor Rhys had hired hadn't just built her clothes that honored her figure. He'd built her armor, and she wore it like she'd been born in it. Somewhere near the bar, Celeste's face went the color of the tablecloths the second she spotted them. Her champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. She recovered fast, too fast. the recovery of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to smile through a held breath. But Avalon had spent 6 months reading rooms for a living, and a held breath was the loudest sound in it. The half-brother arrived 12 minutes later, walked in from the crowd like he belonged there, released weeks earlier through a bribe Blackwood had arranged for exactly this moment. A folder of fabricated documents tucked under one arm, meant to hand Rhys over to federal agents under the banner of justice. He didn't see Gideon's people already stationed at both exits. He didn't see Marisol near the coat check phone, raised, recording. He'd planned for guns. Nobody had planned for a waitress with a microphone. Avalon set down her glass, crossed the room in heels that didn't so much as whisper against the marble, stepped up to the small stage where the quartet had just finished a piece, and reached for the microphone stand before anyone thought to stop her. The room quieted, the way rooms do when they sense, before they understand why, that something is about to change. 6 months ago, she said, and her voice didn't shake. A man in this exact room told me to stay in the back so a certain table wouldn't have to look at a body like mine while they ate. A ripple went through the crowd, half of them recognizing her now, the rest recalculating who she was. She played the recording. Celeste's voice, crisp and certain, filled the room. "He'll be dead by dessert. The drive's already in my clutch." Somewhere behind her, she heard the exact sound of Celeste's champagne glass hitting the floor, and not breaking, just rolling foam spreading dark across pale marble. She showed the photo of the manager taking his bribe, projected large enough that his own face went white from across the room. She told the gathered elite of Miami that Celeste Langford had sold out Rhys's sister 11 years before, the same woman who had smiled at every one of them for years, who had sat at their tables, worn their compliments, and never once flinched. Celeste didn't scream. She went very still instead, the way people do when the floor they've been standing on for years finally admits it was never there. What made this moment land wasn't the recording or the photograph. It was where Avalon chose to stand while she played them. Not beside Rhys, not behind him, but in front, alone, at the microphone. He could have taken from her in half a second, and didn't. A man who spends his life proving he needs no one learns in that instant what it looks like to be protected by someone else's courage instead of his own. Gun. That's the trade neither of them had put into words yet. She'd stopped needing him to save her, and in doing that, she'd finally given him something to be proud of, instead of something to guard. Celeste's half-brother was seized on the spot, the folder of fabricated documents falling out of his hands and scattering across the floor like a magic trick that had run out of tricks. The manager, the same one who'd told her to stay in the back, was walked out through the same oak doors he'd once used to signal a man in a shadowed corner. He never worked in that city again. 3 months later, a rumor placed him managing a diner off I-75, though nobody who'd worked that dining room ever bothered to confirm it. Rhys didn't step forward to defend Avalon. He stood behind her instead, close enough that the room could see it, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the same weight it had the night he'd killed the music in that room, with 2 words. "The woman you all looked through," he said, "now holds the key to whether this empire stands or falls. From tonight, anyone who touches her goes through me first." A pause, long enough that no one in that room dared fill it. "And I promise you, none of you have the nerve." Nobody laughed this time. Nobody had it in them. Her brother was recovered from the warehouse within the hour, the exchange rendered pointless by everything that had just happened in front of 300 witnesses. She got the call on Gideon's phone standing near the coat check, with her heels finally off, and she didn't cry until she heard her brother's actual voice on the line, small and confused, and safe. That night on the rooftop over the bay, the string quartet was a memory 2 floors down, and the wind off the water finally cooled the sapphire gown against her skin. Rhys placed a simple ring in her palm. Not diamonds, not a spectacle, just a thin band with a single sapphire set low. The kind of ring a man picks when he's choosing for one specific person, and not for an audience. Not a rushed proposal, he said. Only a promise. She turned it over once between her fingers, feeling its weight, small and certain. "You already had this made," she said, "before tonight." Weeks ago. He didn't look away when he said it, which told her more than the ring did. "I didn't know how to give it to you without it looking like gratitude. I needed you to do something today that had nothing to do with me, so you'd know it wasn't that. You're not invisible to anyone anymore," he said, low enough that it belonged only to her, least of all to me. She smiled, the dimple in her left cheek catching the light off the water, and for the first time in longer than she could count, she didn't feel the old instinct to look away from being looked at. "I don't need you to protect me," she said. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm asking." She didn't need to become someone else. She only needed to be seen exactly as she was. Celeste and the men who had helped her were dealt with according to the rules of a world that didn't answer to ordinary courts. Roman Blackwood lost the one weapon he'd spent 11 years building the woman inside Rhys's own house, and with her gone, his network in the port unraveled faster than anyone expected, cut off piece by an underboss who now had a woman in every meeting who could smell a lie before it finished forming. 6 weeks after the gala, Gideon mentioned almost in passing that the old manager's diner off I-75 had quietly closed. Avalon didn't ask why. Some debts settle themselves without anyone needing to say a word about it. Avalon and Rhys stepped into a life that was for the first time entirely public. Not hidden in back rooms, not built on secrecy, shared in front of everyone as equals. They ate dinner one night at a small Cuban place 2 blocks from the old restaurant. No reservations under shell names, no security sweeping the room first, just a table by the window. Miguel, the dishwasher, was the one who sat them, having taken a job managing the front of house there after the old restaurant let half its staff go following the gala's fallout. He didn't make it a moment. He just smiled at Avalon, like a man who remembered exactly who'd wrapped his burned hand in a clean towel and poured the water himself. Rhys asked her once over that dinner, why the compass? She traced the edge of the tattoo peeking above his collar with one finger, the way she'd wanted to for months, and never let herself. "My sister wanted to see the world," he said. "She used to say a compass only matters if you're brave enough to actually go somewhere. I got it after she died, because I stopped believing that. Then I met a waitress who read a room better than any compass I've ever owned." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. She still remembered the sound of a manager's voice from months before telling her to stay where no one could see her. She thought of it sometimes, not with bitterness, but with something close to gratitude, because it had taught her exactly how much people miss when they only look at the surface. The waitress the world had once decided not to see had ended up holding the map that saved an empire, exposing the woman who had tried to destroy it, and walking out the other side, standing taller than anyone in that ballroom had ever imagined she could. This story reminds us that the people who stop noticing themselves are often the ones who never stopped noticing everyone else. Avalon didn't win because she got braver overnight. She won because she'd spent years paying attention. The same quiet skill, widowhood and retirement teach almost everyone. Eventually, whether we asked for the lesson or not. If you've spent a season feeling looked through by a family that got busy, a neighborhood that got younger, a mirror that got harder to face, here's something concrete to try this week. Call one person you haven't spoken to in months and tell them one true thing you noticed about their life. Not a compliment, an observation. It's a small, deliberate act of being seen and seeing back, and it rebuilds the exact muscle Avalon used to save an empire. Dignity in the end isn't loud. It's the woman at the water pitcher who kept her eyes open when everyone told her to disappear. Write down one thing today, however small, that you noticed and nobody else did. That habit is worth more than any speech about strength. What did you think of Avalon's transformation from an invisible waitress to the woman who held an empire together? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.